Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. I'm Jamey Eisenberg. That's Heath Cummings. That's Robert Turbin. We're taking a look at the roster trends of the moves you made on CBSSports.com leagues on Tuesday night, and a lot of leagues run waivers on Wednesday. And as Robert told you, he likes to play the waiver wire for the fantasy playoffs. A lot of fantasy managers do as well, and there are a lot of great options that we told you to pick up heading into Week 15. Let's show you the most added list. And listen, we normally gloss over the defenses, but the DSTs, the kickers, could be very prominent options, especially that guy at number 5, Kyrie Fairbairn, who's been one of the best kickers, but was dropped, understandably so, going into his bye week. So we spent a little time talking about Patrick Taylor. Robert likes him this week as a potential starting option, given what the 49ers are looking like. Heath, why don't you give your take on Patrick Taylor? Can he be a starter for fantasy managers in this matchup against the Rams?
If Isaac Guerendo is out, then yes, he can be a starter. He could be a starter. And I would agree with what Robert said, that like historically what we've seen is next man up in the San Francisco backfield is a must-start fantasy running back. I do think Patrick Taylor, as a 26-year-old who's in his 4th year in the league and has one game with double-digit carries, now 2 maybe, after last week, and has averaged about 3.5 yards per carry, puts that theory to the test. I'm concerned that he won't be heavily involved in the passing game. So while last week I had Guerendo ranked as a top 12 running back, this week without Guerendo, I would rank Patrick Taylor as a high-end flex, not somebody I'd want to start as an RB2.
All right, so we have basically the 5th string running back for San Francisco, likely starting on Thursday night. We have the 4th string running back for the Raiders starting, potentially his 3rd game in a row, in Sincere McCormack. Robert, what have you seen from Sincere? What a great name, by the way. What have you seen from him in the last 2 games? And he has a very interesting matchup this week against the Falcons.
Well, the one thing that's really noticeable, especially 2 games ago, is the Raiders are trusting him with the football. I mean, he's getting some of the workload there like a starting running back would, and I think he's produced, especially last game. And by the way, I had to start him last game after picking him up in waivers, and he did just fine for me, although it wasn't enough to make the playoffs in that particular league. But I think that he's been highly productive, and I like him in this spot. He's impressed the coaching staff. He's proven that he can carry the load and be a starter, and I think he's a good flex option for some fantasy managers this week in the playoffs if you have to use him.
Yeah, looking like a guy that's going to get 15-plus touches again. And we'll see what happens with Alexander Mattison, but Zamir White placed on injured reserve with that quad injury. Amir Abdullah only had 2 offensive touches in last week's game, so could be looking like a great situation for McCormack, who did a very nice job against the Chiefs 2 games ago and against the Bucs last week. Heath, another running back on this list was Isaiah Davis, and we got word today that Breece Hall still dealing with that knee injury, not looking like a lock to return, although the Jets were hopeful that he could return in Week 15. It's a great matchup against the Jaguars, but we also saw Braylon Allen basically split the workload evenly with Isaiah Davis. So which of the 2 do you like better, and would you consider starting either one?
I've got Isaiah Davis just a click higher, but these 4 running backs that we've talked about here, McCormack, Davis, Braylon Allen, Patrick Taylor, all within about 5 spots of each other in the running back rankings. I do like Isaiah Davis a little bit more in the passing game than I do Braylon Allen. I love this matchup for both of them. I think it's a situation where if things break right, they might both be top 20 running backs. So Davis just slightly over Allen, McCormack just slightly over Davis.
And we have a Jaguars run defense that is number 2 in most fantasy points allowed to opposing backfield. So it could be a good situation for both. Robert, you feel the same way? Allen or Davis if you had to choose one of the 2?
Yeah, I like Davis. I like Davis a little bit more, particularly because, like he said, he can be more impactful in the passing game. But I do feel like Braylon Allen, has more impact as far as the red zone is concerned, which could equal touchdowns. And so I'd probably put Allen just a hair above Davis in this particular matchup.
I had them ranked back-to-back, so I think it's going to be another shared situation. Davis got the touchdown. That could be what sways one of these 2 guys being better than the other, but both have a great opportunity here if Breece Hall is out. Let's talk about the most dropped list here. And look, at this point in the season, you're moving on from players that are not going to be starters from you unless you're trying to handcuff your backup running backs or looking ahead to the upcoming weeks and moving on from some defense. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on this. You got guys that are on IR at this point with Jonathan Brooks. We covered that situation at the start of the show. Dallas Goedert's going to miss the rest of the fantasy playoffs. Hopefully he will return for the NFL playoffs for the Eagles. Unfortunately, Will Dissly's had a nice season helping fantasy managers. He's out for several weeks, so you can move on from almost all of these guys. Just keep an eye on some of the DSTs that are getting dropped. They may have some good matchups coming up down the road. Speaking of that, a lot of fantasy managers have earned a first-round bye, like our buddy Robert Turbin here. So you're looking ahead to week 16, and you might be looking to stream quarterbacks, and maybe stream tight ends, and obviously streaming DSTs because you don't need to worry about your lineup this week. You're looking ahead at the best matchups. You might need a quarterback, might need a tight end, and might need a defense to replace the starters that you've been using so far. So let's show you a list of the quarterbacks that have great week 16 matchups. Again, this is 2 weeks from now, not for week 15. You got Anthony Richardson against the Titans. We'll see how he does against the Broncos. Jameis Winston against the Bengals. That's as good a matchup as you will find. And Cooper Rush, if you want to trust him, taking on the Buccaneers. So, Heath, of these 3 guys, you trust them to be number 1 quarterbacks if you're in the fantasy semifinal?
Absolutely, if it's Jameis Winston. He has averaged 315 passing yards per game, 22 fantasy points per game since he became the starter, and had to play the Steelers in 2 of his last 3 games. He really probably is a 25 point per game guy. Absolutely love Jameis in this spot against a Bengals defense that has allowed 3 of the last 4 and 4 of the last 6 quarterbacks they've faced to score at least 27 fantasy points. If Jameis Winston doesn't completely fall on his face against the Chiefs this week, he might be a top 5 quarterback in my rankings next week.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So hold on to Jameis Winston if you picked him up, and pick him up if you're looking ahead to get a quarterback for that week 16 matchup. Let's take a look at the tight ends that might be impactful for you in week 16. And there are some guys that you might want to pick up for week 15 as well. Jake Ferguson doesn't just get the Bucs in week 16. He obviously gets the Panthers in week 15. Dalton Schultz, same thing, gets the Dolphins in week 15. They've been very bad against tight ends so far this season, and then gets the Chiefs in week 16. And Juwan Johnson, we don't expect Derek Carr to be the quarterback there, but obviously he's been playing well, and we'll see whether it's Jake Haener or Spencer Rattler, if they can keep Juwan Johnson going, who's picked things up of late. So, Robert, of those 3 tight ends, do you have any faith in them to be starting in the semifinals if you need to use them in week 16?
If I did, all 3 would be a reach, to be honest. But I'd go with Juwan Johnson. I'd lean towards Juwan Johnson. Even without Derek Carr, he just seems to be somewhat of a security blanket for all the quarterbacks for the New Orleans Saints once they get him going early and he gets his opportunities and he finds his way into the end zone. The other guys don't quite find their way into the end zone the way that Juwan Johnson does, in my opinion. So that's the guy I'm leaning towards out of those 3.
And look, it's a great call because the Saints receiving corps is clearly beat up. There is a chance that Chris Olave could return. He's eligible to come off IR for this week. But if you're Chris Olave looking at a team that's not in playoff contention, and doesn't have his quarterback, why would you risk getting another concussion based on what he's dealt with this season? And to your point, Jake Ferguson, no touchdown so far on the season. Dalton Schultz only has 1. It did come in his last game in week 13 prior to Houston's bye week. All right, DSTs are very important. We know there's some great matchups. Basically, you're chasing who's playing the Giants. If you can find that matchup, the Ravens get them this week, and then it's the Falcons who gets them in week 16. Rams get the Jets and the struggling Aaron Rodgers. Packers get the Saints with their most likely backup quarterback playing, and the Raiders get the Jaguars. That pass rush will be a little bit of a problem, most likely for Mac Jones if he's still the starter there. So, Heath, of these DSTs, are you looking ahead and picking up one of these options for that semifinal week?
Yeah, I think it'd be the Falcons. The interesting thing with Tommy DeVito starting is that he hasn't thrown a lot of interceptions, but he has one of the most insane sack rates of any quarterback that I've ever seen. Last year, his sack rate was north of 11%. This year, it's been over 11%, 14% sack rate over the last 2 weeks. That's fantastic. Now, if your league is only about turnovers, then maybe you look to whoever's facing the Saints. But if you get points for sacks, I'll take the Falcons against Tommy DeVito.
And give the Falcons credit. They have 9 sacks in their last 2 games, so we'll see what they do in a great matchup this week as well against the Raiders. But obviously the Falcons could be great against the Giants. Offensive line is falling apart. Quarterback situation's not exactly great, and they're barely scoring points. So it could be a good situation for the Falcons DSD. Never thought that we would say that at the start of the season based on how that defense had performed, but clearly a great opportunity to chase the matchups, which you are when you're looking ahead to these Week 16 games. All right, let's answer one of your questions here before we take a break. And we got this one here from That There Is an RV from Cousin Eddie. All right, Tony Pollard or Juwan Jennings in the flex spot in PPR. Robert, which of the 2 guys do you like better?
Juwan Jennings, baby, all day.
Heath?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Tony Pollard. I really like the fact that he's remained a workhorse 20-touch back, even with Tyjae Spears back. I'm going to stick with Pollard. He's a top 12 running back for me.
I would like to know who Cousin Eddie is benching because these 2 guys are going to be awesome this week. So start them both if you can, but in PPR, I might lean toward Jennings a little bit just because I think we could see a shootout between those 2 teams. And for what it's worth, I know the Bengals defense isn't good. When the Titans have been chasing points, so if the Bengals offense shows up, that's when Pollard's been a little bit tough to trust. So if the Bengals pull ahead early, we could see Pollard maybe not having the type of game that I think we're expecting him to have. But start them both if you can. All right, we're going to take a break right now. We come back. It's time for our running back roundtable. We'll talk about some topics around the running back position. Robert will give us his take. Heath will give us the fantasy spin, and we'll help you out with some of these questionable backfields. That's next here on FFT.